From the tower gallery, Ellen sees the sea answer her vigil at last. Ellen ran up the iron steps as sleet stung her cheeks and the tower groaned in the wind. Below, black water struck the skerry hard enough to shake the lantern glass. She reached the gallery, lifted her hand to shield the flame, and saw it, a green light far out among the reefs, steady where no boat should have held. Her father, Nils, came after her with the oil can bumping his knee. He smelled of tar, wet wool, and smoke from the stove below. "Do not answer it," he said, though she had not moved. Each winter, on the night before St. Lucy's Day, that strange glow crossed the shoals and paused beyond the skerry. The women in Marstrand made the sign of the cross and shut their shutters. Old fishers muttered that the havsfru, the sea woman, sent one light from her halls to see who still called the drowned by name. 7 years earlier, Arvid Holm had rowed out through a lesser storm to bring back a carved wedding chest left at the mainland quay. He had laughed from the boat, one mitten raised, and promised to return before the rye bread cooled. The bread had gone hard on the table. The chest had never come home. Only his cap washed ashore, snagged on bladderwrack below the lighthouse steps. Now the green light moved closer. It did not leap like lightning or bob like a lantern in a boat. It glided low over the water, as if carried under glass by a hand beneath the waves. Ellen gripped the rail until the cold bit through her skin. If this was the sea's old trick, why did it come tonight with such purpose? The night the oars fell silent, Nils took Ellen by the wrist and led her down from the gallery. In the lamp room, the great lens turned with its measured breath, bright, dark, bright again across the sea. He set the oil can down and barred the door with a wooden spar that had held against storms for 20 winters. He returned in his wedding coat, carrying the sea's cold in every fold. "No one opens for a light from the shoals," he said. His beard held drops of sleet. "Not for a voice, and not for a face that should be under church earth." Ellen said nothing. She had heard these words since she was 19. Yet every year she had climbed the steps when the date came, and every year Nils had followed. Below the tower, their cottage crouched between stone walls built to break the wind. A bunch of dried juniper hung over the door. Nils changed it each autumn, not because he feared old sea tales, but because his wife had once done the same before fever took her. His thick hands always shook when he tied the cord. Grief often borrows the shape of custom. That first winter after Arvid vanished, the village pastor had come by boat with 2 men and read aloud the names of the lost in the chapel at Kuhn. Ellen had stood through the whole service with frozen shoes and heard Arvid's name spoken into candle smoke. She did not weep then. She waited until she came home and found his wedding shirt folded on the chest, still smelling faintly of soap and dried meadow herbs. The green glow shone through the lower window. It slid across the floorboards like pond light. Nils turned at once and pressed his palm against Ellen's shoulder. A knock sounded at the cottage door. It was not loud. 3 even taps, patient as a guest who knew he was expected. Nils reached for the boat hook he kept by the hearth. Ellen stared at the latch. Her heart beat hard enough to hurt. For 7 years she had begged for one sign that Arvid had not died alone in dark water. Now a sign stood outside in the storm, and fear entered before hope could speak. Another knock came, then a man's voice, low and clear through the wood. "Ellen, the rye bread must be cold by now." Nils closed his eyes as if struck. He had heard that line before, carried on the wind the day Arvid rode off. Ellen moved around him and lifted the bar before he could stop her. Arvid Holm stood on the threshold. He wore the same dark coat with horn buttons, the one he had meant to wear to the wedding feast after changing from his sea clothes. His hair lay damp against his forehead. No beard marked his face. 7 winters had not bent him, thickened him, or lined him. He looked as he had looked at 24, save for the stillness in him. Water dripped from his sleeves, yet no steam rose from his clothes near the fire. His skin held the pale cast of a cod pulled from deep water. Around him lingered a smell of salt, kelp, and something sharp like opened mussel shells. "Ellen," he said again, and his mouth shaped her name with tenderness, though his lips were blue. "I have come for you. We were to be wed before dawn." Nils stepped between them with the boat hook raised. "You were buried by God's own sea." Arvid looked at him without anger. "Not buried, kept." The room tightened around that one word. The lamp hissed. Sleet rattled against the pane. Ellen saw then that Arvid cast only a faint shadow, though the fire burned high. He turned his gaze back to her. "I could not return before. The halls below do not count years as we do. But I asked, and tonight I was given one tide. Bring the lantern from the gallery and come down to the landing. We must leave before first light, or I will be taken where no path opens twice. Salt on the wedding shirt. Ellen did not answer at once. She led Arvid to the bench by the wall, more from habit than trust. He sat upright, hands on his knees, and left no damp mark on the wood. The brooch proved he had come from somewhere memory could still reach. Nils kept the boat hook across his lap. Say where you have been. Arvid looked toward the window, where the green light waited beyond the black glass. Below the reefs, there are halls there where fish swim past carved pillars, and the roof burns green without flame. I heard songs through stone. I slept, yet I did not sleep. When I woke, I thought only one night had passed. He spoke plainly, without wonder in his voice. That frightened Ellen more than any wild tale would have done. A liar adorns his words. Arvid laid his down like nets on a pier. He drew something from inside his coat and placed it on the table. Ellen caught her breath. It was the small silver brooch her mother had given her for the wedding, shaped like two leaves joined at the stem. It had been pinned to the shawl wrapped around the missing chest. I found it on the floor of those halls, Arvid said. It drifted down after me. I kept it for this night. Ellen took the brooch. It burned cold in her palm. There was a thin line of green weed caught in the hinge. Near midnight, the storm eased enough for the sea to show its ridges. Nils sent Ellen to fetch more peat from the lean-to, then followed her out. He closed the door so Arvid could not hear. His shoulders, broad from ropes and barrels, seemed older under the falling sleet. Child, he said, though he had not called her that in years, if the dead can walk in wearing a young man's face, then a father must grow hard. Ellen looked toward the cottage. Warm light lined the doorframe. He knew about the bread. He knew it because he was there that day. Nils swallowed, or because something below the sea reads sorrow as we read letters. She held the brooch up under the yard lamp. The silver leaves were scratched in the same place where she had dropped them once on the quay. Would a trick know this? Nils did not answer. Instead, he took off his mitten and touched the brooch with one thick finger. His nail had gone black years ago when a hatch slammed on it. Arvid used to laugh and call it the keeper's seal. Nils's hand trembled now. When your mother was dying, he said, she asked me to promise one thing. Keep the light, not the tower, not the house. The light. Men out there trusted more than they trust on. The words struck Ellen with a force she had not expected. All these years she had thought her father followed her vigils because he feared old sea powers. Now she saw the other truth. If grief drew her toward the shore, duty tied him to the lamp. He had spent 7 winters watching both flame and daughter, knowing he might lose either. Inside, Arvid began to hum the tune the fiddler had chosen for their wedding feast. The sound drifted through the boards, soft and careful. Ellen pressed her lips together until they hurt. That tune had once made her see rye loaves, polished benches, women in white caps, and Arvid standing shy in a clean shirt. Now it filled the yard with another picture. Green halls, sealed water, no sun on a face. She went back in carrying peat. Arvid looked up at once. You remember, he said. I remember everything, Ellen replied. Then come. He leaned forward. There is no want there. No storm breaks a roof. No net returns empty. No one grows old. Nils made a sound in his throat, half anger, half pity. But Ellen heard only the last words. No one grows old. At 26, she had first feared the turning of years. At 28, she had worn black kerchiefs more often than ribbons. At 31, she no longer looked for wedding cloth in the market. She helped her father trim wicks, scrape soot, and mark passing ships in the log. Her hands had roughened. Fine lines had come at the corners of her eyes from salt wind. Life had continued, faithful and stern. Arvid had escaped all of that. She studied his face and felt a strange ache, sharper than longing. He had returned carrying her hope, yet he had not carried her years. Between them lay 7 winters no promise could cross. Did you ask about my father? She said. Arvid seemed puzzled. Why would I? Tonight is for us. The answer settled like a stone in her chest. Whatever place had held him had preserved memory, but not weight. It had kept desire and washed away the slow duties that make a household stand. He had come back for the bride at the quay, not for the woman at the lamp. The green path below the reef an hour before dawn, the sea changed. The wind dropped as if a door had shut over the sky. Even the gulls fell silent on the lee side of the rock. Between the lighthouse flame and the sea road, Ellen chose which promise could still serve the living. Arvid rose at once. The tide opens. He stepped outside without cloak or cap. Ellen followed to the landing, the storm lantern in her hand. Nils came behind her carrying the spare lamp and the tower keys. The skerry shone with wet frost. Far below, the green light widened into a trembling road across the water, leading toward the outer reef where no boat could pass at low tide. Arvid stood at the edge of the stones. "Bring the lantern," he said. "You must walk where I walk. Do not look down." The green path pulsed under the surface like light through bottle glass. Ellen could see nothing solid beneath it, only dark water and the pale turn of foam. Yet Arvid placed one boot onto the glow and did not sink. He held out his hand. "Come before the tide shuts." For one breath she saw the life she had guarded in secret. No more winter vigils. No more setting an extra bowl away each year and then putting it back on the shelf untouched. No more hearing other women call their children in from the quay while her own room stayed quiet. Only Arvid, young forever, speaking her name as if the missing years had been no more than an hour. Then Nils climbed past her and thrust the spare lamp into her free hand. His face was harsh in the cold, but his eyes were wet. "If you go, the light dies before morning. The merchant brig from Gothenburg is due on the east line. I saw her signal yesterday at dusk." He did not say, "Stay for me." He did not say, "I am old and cannot keep the tower alone." He spoke of the ship because that was the true burden in his bones. Men he would never meet were trusting a flame on a rock. Duty often arrives without a kindly face. Ellen looked from one lamp to the other. One burned with yellow oil flame, warm and plain. The other road glowed green and cold, leading toward a love she had fed for 7 years. Arvid's hand remained stretched toward her. "They kept their word to me," he said. "Keep yours to me." At last she understood the test hidden in the old tale. The dead did not send back a light to reward longing. They sent it to ask whether grief would consume the living use of one heart after another. Ellen set the storm lantern down on the stone and walked toward Arvid until only one pace remained between them. The sea below hissed softly in the reef cracks. He looked at her with such hope that for a moment her legs weakened. She took the silver brooch from her pocket and fastened it to his coat. "I would have married you," she said. "I would have stood beside you through poor catches, cracked nets, and all the ordinary years. That was the promise." She lifted her chin. "But I will not go where dawn cannot follow." Arvid did not move. The green road flickered. "I came back for you. And I kept watch for you," Ellen answered. "Now I must keep the light." He stared at her as if hearing a language he once knew and had partly lost. For the first time, pain crossed his face. It made him look young again, and that nearly undid her. Behind them, from the tower, a clockwork click carried over the rock as the lens turned. Bright, dark, bright. Arvid lowered his hand. The green light around his boots stirred and rose higher, licking at his coat hem like transparent weed. "If you refuse, I cannot remain." "I know." His eyes shifted past her to Nils. "I should have brought the chest," he said, with a faint shadow of his old shy smile. Nils, who had stood like carved oak, suddenly bowed his head. "You should have come home before the bread cooled," he replied. The words, plain and late, broke something open in them all. Ellen stepped forward and placed the warm tower keys in Arvid's hand for one heartbeat. Then took them back. It was the closest she could come to a farewell touch without crossing into the cold that clung to him. "Go in peace, Arvid home." The green road folded inward. Arvid's figure thinned, as if rain erased him stroke by stroke. Last of all, his face remained above the waterline, pale in the strange light. Then the reef was empty. Only the brooch flashed once below the surface and disappeared. When the first ship saw the light, the silence after his vanishing felt heavier than the storm had felt. Ellen stood on the landing until Nils took the lantern from her stiff fingers. Together they climbed the tower steps while the eastern edge of the sky turned from black to iron gray. The first ship passed safely, and the living world answered with its own plain light. In the lamp room, the lens had nearly run down. Nils reached for the crank, but Ellen stopped him. She wound the mechanism herself, arms straining against the weight until the turning steadied and the beam swept out clean over the sea. Bright, dark, bright. They trimmed the wick, polished the salt from the inside pane, and fed the flame. Work restored order to breath and hand. Below them, the green light did not return. When dawn opened fully, the merchant brig appeared where Nils had said she would, two-masted and cautious, feeling her way past the reefs. Her answering signal flashed from the deck. Ellen watched the vessel alter course by a few safe degrees and pass the skerry without touching stone. Only then did she sit on the stair and weep. Nils sat one step below her, not speaking. After a while, he took from his pocket a crust of rye bread wrapped in cloth. He had saved it from the night before St. Lucy's Day, though it had gone hard as wood. He broke it in two with effort and offered her half. They ate it in silence, letting the dry crumbs soften on their tongues like a shared act of mourning. By noon the villagers had heard that a figure was seen on the skerry at dawn, standing where no man could stand. 2 women came by boat with hot broth, and the pastor came after them. He asked no foolish questions. He only listened while Ellen spoke of the green path, the unchanged face, and the words at the landing. The pastor turned his cap in his hands. "Some doors open to prove whether we know our proper threshold," he said at last. That winter, Ellen carried the silver brooch no more. She had not seen it on Arvid's coat when he faded, yet a week later she found it lodged in a crack of granite near the landing, washed clean of weed. She set it in the chapel alms box without a name attached. Spring came late. Nets dried on lines between the sheds. Children chased each other over the keystones. Ellen still climbed the tower on St. Lucy's Eve, but not to wait for Arvid's return. She checked the oil, cleaned the lens, and stood one moment on the gallery with her face to the wind. The sea smelled of salt and thawing wrack. Far off, a lantern moved on a lawful boat, yellow and human. Ellen watched it until it joined the lights of shore. Then she went below, shut the door against the cold, and laid fresh bread on the table for her father before the loaf could lose its heat.